Hey, playoffs, basketball, NBA, let's do it. Bonus.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo.
We dismiss the pomp and circumstance, Doug. You're Doug. I'm Adam. This is the NBA playoffs, man. We're coming in on a Friday. Figured why not have some fun? A little host battle, trying to nail down these predictions as we head into the weekend of what should be really great NBA action. Play-ins, though, Friday night, which are exciting and even have some hot button information coming across the wire.
Yeah, look, we're recording this on Friday afternoon, so probably most of you, I suspect, will hear it on Saturday, or even maybe Sunday. So at that point, the plans will be over. So we'll roll through these pretty quick. Obviously, the big news that came through was that Paul George was going to miss this playing game because he tested positive for COVID. Totally brutal blow to lose him at this point in the season, and just essentially, not even essentially, a must-win game to make the playoffs. My guess is, I'll say this before not knowing the outcome. The Clippers are the kind of team that are really well coached and super scrappy around situations like this, and played so far above their head over the course of the season without Paul George for a lot of it, and without Kawhi Leonard for all of it, and are still in the playoff race. So I don't think it's a complete death knell for them. It just makes it a lot tougher. But yeah, totally brutal blow on that one. I think that I want to just make predictions here real quick. I think that I'm gonna, you know what I'm gonna say? I'm gonna say Clippers still win. I'm going to say Clippers still pull it out.
It was a very compelling argument you just made there, so I almost had to wipe away, as I'll track all of our picks throughout this, wipe away the Pelicans. I want the Pelicans to be in. They're the young team. They're the more exciting team. I think it would just make for a fun first-round matchup. So I'll take the Pelicans there. The other one is obviously the losers of the 7-8 play-in with our Brooklyn Nets, the Cleveland Cavaliers, and the Hawks. I am almost 1,000% sure I know that you're picking the Hawks.
Well, Jared Allen is going to play. So again, this one does that actually changed it for me a little bit, but it's the hand. He's not 100% healthy. I'm going to say the Hawks still win this. There was a pretty definitive win they had over Charlotte. They're just a better team. They were projected to be better. I still think they're better. The season did not play out in their favor along those lines, but yeah, I'll go. You going Hawks here with this one?
I'm going Cavs. I figure, it's like I said, a little bit of a little bit of action there on the floor. And it's funny, so much about it should be, the perimeter shooting the Hawks, the wave after wave, the best player, always try to default to that with Trae Young. I don't know, man. The Cavs have had that funky kind of season. I think they're deserving of making it in, even if only to lose in the first round. So I'm taking the Cavs.
Can I say one thing about that? The one reason I'm probably going to be rooting for the Hawks in this one is not really any specific rooting interest, is that because I kind of just think they have a better chance of making a real test for the Heat. And yeah, I think from that perspective, the playoffs just become better because Trae is just the best player in that series. It's going to be in this game for the Hawks. They have a little bit more of a complete team. So I think I'm still rooting for the Hawks, but that's only because I just think it'll be for a better first round matchup.
That's fair. Let's kick it off then into the weekend. Saturday, Western Conference games to start here. Utah versus Dallas. Once again, you'll hit us with the spread on this series, but another injury, which is the last thing you want. You have Paul George there for the play-in. Now it's about Luka and the impact that he could have on the series too.
Yeah, I'm over. Our friends over at Bet Online have the Jazz at -305, even though the Mavericks have home court advantage. But that's because Luka got hurt in the last game of the season, and it looked pretty bad. And it actually, frankly, at the time looked worse than they're saying. He's going to miss at least the first 2 games, with the hope, I think, that he's going to come back from the third. That really swung the series line pretty definitively here. Obviously, losing, Luka, wherever you want to put him, let's just say top 10. It's definitely higher almost. But a top 10 player at the absolute very, very worst, and he's not that low. Losing them as the linchpin of the entire thing that you're trying to do is a completely brutal beat. So I'm not surprised that this is where I'm not surprised this is where the line landed. Sort of gift wrap for the Jazz in some respects. Where did you have this one?
I'm going to go, man. I was tantalized about the idea about if he could come back, but you heard Jason Kidd talk about him. He said, has he pushed you yet to play? He said, nah, I haven't heard anything about that yet. So it just feels like he's further than closer. Yeah. I'll be going with The Utah Jazz in 6.
Oh, same. Look at that. Great
there
minds.
we go. Okay,
Yeah,
see?
Jazz 4-2.
This is how you know automatically the Mavericks will somehow sweep the series 4-0.
Have bet this. Just by the way, I have bet this series on that exact line 4-2, and the Jazz just money line in this one. I think it's actually probably even too speculative that like he can even come back like 100%. It's just it's just the worst time ever to get injured. I hate injuries. This is what the main reason that sometimes sports can be brutal is that just to do the whole season, like all you really want from anything, even like Nets independent, all you want from the playoffs is to have every team go in full strength and them all just like settle on the court. It's like a total meritocracy around that. And when it's not, I just get bummed because I'm like, oh, it just shouldn't be that way. We should all have the best versions of every team, and we'll just see who wins. Like,
and especially when you think about some of these guys can come back later in the playoffs, right? So it's like if you could get Luka, if Luka's going to be able to come back eventually, then the matchups further down the road are better, and you have the best players.
One other thing about the Mavs, like for as much as like people have maligned Jason Kidd at times, like this is another situation where they have been able to be okay at times without Luka. Like with Brunson, Dinwiddie's been a revelation. That if you're looking for some rooting interest here. Obviously, he back broke the Nets earlier in the season on the buzzer beater. So I do think there's like a world where they're really competitive. It lines up so well for the Jazz here. It's just along those lines.
Hit me with Memphis, Minnesota. What's the spread on that series after Minnesota and the emotion, the raw emotion that was Pat Beverly surging through that playing game?
He got fined. he ended up getting fined for
too emotional. It
was like a whole thing. It was like there's just basically they're so funny. I'll get to the line in a second. It was so funny about this because it was like you just kind of did a lot of stuff, so it's just gonna be 30,000. It's like for on-court antics, for things he said online, for things he said in the post-game presser. It was just like this sort of like a cumulative fine. We're not just gonna pinpoint one specific thing that you did. So anyway, because we'll mention that because we talked about it. Now this series is minus 385 in favor of the Grizzlies. I'm gonna stall for a second because I need to write down what my prediction is. Not totally surprised about where this one lands just because Memphis was so good this season, either having Ja or not. Like they were kind of just as good, if not better, when he didn't play. And so it's just such a weird team to evaluate because teams usually aren't like that. And so I don't know. I will land in a weird way on them because usually you want to dial in to what your best like 5 to 7 person lineup is. But they were so good with like every lineup they used this year. I will say sometimes that can throw you a little off when it comes playoff time because sometimes the things that work really well in the regular season, like crazy cool depth, the ability to like have your second unit destroy other teams' second units, that doesn't matter as much in the playoffs because you just can't. You're only going to play the other team's best players, right? So, anyway, that being said, they're clearly the favorite, but I'd be interested where you land on this one. Oh, we holding it up?
Wolves.
4-3. I went Memphis. I went Memphis 4-1. Memphis wins.
I'm going for this is a bit of this is what they call go with your heart, not your head. The classic misconception. The Wolves have been a really fun team, and maybe to your point, it's like now Cat coming out of that playing game where he fouls out. That's incredibly concerning. But man, you look at Anthony and you look at what D'Angelo Russell's been able to do there. They're a really fun team, and maybe it just feels like as good as Ja Morant has been and as good as Memphis has been, a little bit of that Utah syndrome from last year where they were their number 1 seed, had this epic regular season, and then didn't quite have all the parts and pieces in the perfect position on their roster to have a real deep playoff run. So why not get bounced early?
My concern with the Wolves is not that they're super fun to watch, which they are. Like I was rooting really hard for them once that crowd was up in the game the other night against the Clippers, and they staged the comeback, and Cat fouls out, and the other guys completely step up and hit big shots. Like it was just a great game. It's more that you kind of saw in that game what I think their bigger problems are is like they have a superstar who's way too mistake prone. They have a superstar that he's bad on defense. Like that's just no other way to put it. He's a very bad defender. He's great on he's generationally great on offense. That's not it, but just like way too many mistakes. And over the course of a 7-game series, That's a pretty tough pill to swallow against a team that has executed like nearly perfectly this season in the Grizzlies. And
There's
so like that's
not a lot of
kind of
reasons to think that I'm using sound logic in this
well,
selection,
one other
but
thing about well, I'll say though, one thing about the Grizzlies is they kill you in transition, and that is not something that holds up very well in the playoffs. So I don't know. This one's interesting. I said 4-1, and I was more that I just don't totally believe in Minnesota yet, more than I believe in Memphis. So I just want to round out my thinking on that one.
that's fair. We turn the page over then as we'll look at Philly and of course the big matchup that we're thinking could be an upset over there in the Eastern Conference, at least maybe from my perspective, when we talk about the Toronto Raptors. Where do you land on the prospects of what feels like a team we know involved with the Brooklyn Nets, got the trade, got James Harden, two best players in the series are going to be on Philly? That's supposed to be the way your mind picks battles like this.
All right, so BetOnline right now has Philly at -170 favorites here. Obviously, they have home court advantage against Toronto. That's sort of important because Matisse Thybulle can't play in the 2 games in Toronto because of vaccination eligibility. I don't think that's like a huge, I don't think that's like a huge blow to the team. It's definitely not great, but it's not like he's this generational. He's not Luka, right? Like not like losing Matisse Thybulle for his 27 minutes of really good defense and 0 offense. It doesn't really, I don't think, move the needle that much. I'll be curious. I have other thoughts, but I want to hear your thoughts first because I heard you say something along the lines of an upset first, and maybe you buried the lead a little bit. But you and I talked a little bit about this off air. But where do you land on this one? Because this is the series I think that has been from just sort of a pundit / betting / just like overall tone. I think this series has been the most polarizing for like where people land on where they think it's gonna what they think is gonna happen in this series. And I think it's for really interesting reasons.
Yeah, I go back to last year, go back to the bubble session. Every time that you look at Toronto and you think about the way that they're constructed and some of the struggles that they've had the last couple of seasons, and they mostly, no Lowry there anymore. They're mostly though the same core with OG, and they've had Siakam obviously, and then they bring in an exciting rookie that starts to change a little bit of the dynamic. But it's Nick Nurse. They're incredibly well coached, and if you look at Philadelphia and Toronto, I see it as a team in Philadelphia that has the 2 best players in the series, yet you could argue that they are the most overrated team entering the playoffs in the Eastern Conference.
Who's that, Philly? Sorry.
Yes, Philadelphia.
Okay, yeah. Sorry.
Well, on Toronto's side of it, for as well coached as they are, you don't look at their roster and say, well, there you go. There's your superstar talent. But they somehow managed to find themselves in this first round series. They won way more games this year than I think people anticipated. They didn't fade down the stretch when they had to navigate some of their injuries as well. They kept themselves right in the mix of it. So it's like, I'm going to lean Nick Nurse over Doc Rivers, and I'm going to lean the consistency that we've seen from Toronto over what has been up and down. And we know integrating James Harden, it was great. It was lulled. What is that going to look like? Not to mention, it's not the most important piece, but losing a player for 3 games potentially over the course of a series when you're on the road in Toronto is not insignificant. So for that reason, as you said, don't bury the lead, but I'm going Raptors 4-3.
I want actually Raptors 4-2, and I think I'm gonna. I bet this
Even
one
more bullish.
also at this number. I bet this one at this number. This one is probably a little bit of a reach. I mean, based on odds alone, it's a reach. So this one's funny because this series has the most narratives built into it than any other series. I think this has one where it's sort of like it actually becomes like sort of a referendum about what you believe about players, and I think that has what's been fueling the like just the differences in opinions. So it's based on certain things like who you think is a better coach. I think almost everyone in the world would take Nick Nurse over Doc Rivers. I also wonder sometimes how much that really matters. You know what I mean? It's clear that he's the better coach. I don't think anyone would argue that. But I'm also wonder if sometimes that gets completely overrated because talent often comes to the top, right? So that's one thing. The second thing is obviously Harden has had some of the most noticeable playoff disintegrations over the years where he was a superstar. That plays into it. So like that's another knock theoretically against Philly, right? Like
and good defensive matchups that Toronto can use against Harden, I think, in this one to frustrate him offensively.
Correct. And so you could really get bothered here. They have a lot of length on defense. They're going to be pretty fully healthy. Not like one strict great defender, but I guess OG is, but like lots of really, really good defenders, a good scheme. And these guys have played a lot of minutes together. So that's the other thing. But then if you think about it, you're like, well, how hard do I want to bet against a guy who is almost definitely going to come in second in the MVP standings this year in Embiid, and he might win, right? So do I want to put in money against definitely the best player in the series? That's always a tough pill to swallow. And again, yeah, does Toronto have a little more depth? Sure, but we just said that doesn't matter as much in the playoffs because you're just going to play these guys max minutes every time. So this one, I still probably weight the things I said at the beginning enough to, I mean, I clearly did it, but to bet Toronto. But I wouldn't also be surprised if I felt really dumb. This would be the one I wouldn't be surprised if I felt dumb about this later. Like when I look back on this and said, oh, right, Philly took this in 5. Why did I bet against Embiid? They don't even have a center that can hang with him at all. Like Kemba, they don't have, you know what I mean? They don't have any size. So this was one I'm prepared. I'm hedging here on an emotional level because I'm prepared to feel the dumbest about this one.
And even saying 4-3, when you think about being in a Game 7 at home in Philadelphia, and I'm saying, yeah, the 2 best players in the series will not win the Game 7 on their home court. I'm asking for a lot, but nevertheless, we'll
real quick, one more question about this, and then we can move on. Do you feel in your mind? Do you feel like the things that have happened in the past, like the Harden, coming up smaller in some playoff games, right? Like the Philly hasn't gotten over the hump. With Embiid, look, the cast of characters are all different. So I understand this. Do you think that actually matters or should we just be looking at it? Hey, this is a new situation. So you can't really evaluate the past. Harden's never played with Embiid before. Embiid's never played with Harden before. It's almost like looking back historically. I'll use an example for the Nets world. Then we'll move on. Then I can get your answer. We look back at the Boston series last year and be like, well, yeah, they trounced Boston in the series last year. It's it's just worthless to compare it to what happened last year. That's a totally different team. So why it doesn't matter. And we clearly did that. We're not comparing it to last year, but I'm wondering if we're not holding Philly to the same sort of rational standard.
The difference for me would be so with Joel Embiid, I think he's still a young enough player that you're seeing the evolution of his game and his mentality. I think that he's a different player. He's a different leader for that team than he was last year, the year before. So him getting over those struggles or dealing with a game or a quarter where he isn't getting his looks, I think you would see less of him worrying about the fouls or this or that and just kind of knowing I'm the most dominant player in this series. I should be able to figure this out. James Harden, on the other hand, he's a veteran. He's been in the league a long time. So I do think that we've seen enough sample sizes throughout the seasons, throughout the years, throughout the playoffs, where when things start going the wrong way for him, the hardest thing he struggles with is not trying to bang his head against the wall on what isn't working. And that's what I think could be detrimental to Philadelphia. If Harden doesn't accept at some point, my shot's not going, I'm not getting my looks, I need to default into my assist mode, I need to set up Embiid, I need to let Embiid carry this series, he could actually be hurting their productivity even for small stretches, and that could be the difference to me.
Yeah, that makes sense. So anyway, I think this is why I said this is the one that's built the most on narratives. This is the one around where your preconceived notions around each player and team and coach ends up kind of mattering, I think, in how you view how the series is going to go.
Hit me with Denver, Golden State here. Obviously, you got Curry. Looks like he's going to be coming back here again. Another MVP, high caliber voter on the Denver side of things. But this feels a little bit like the seeding can be misleading for what this matchup is if these teams can be as healthy as possible.
Right. So the Warriors are minus 255 right now. This jumped on the news that Curry was going to return for game 1. So that line makes sense. The other weird little piece of injury news that just came out 2 days ago is that Jamal Murray might be in the zone to be able to they're calling it the red zone. I've never heard of this term before but that was the term their president of basketball operations used. So that he could return. Now it's totally different. He hasn't played the whole season. That's more of a Ben Simmons kind of situation where he hasn't played the whole season. He's coming back from an ACL surgery from about a year ago. And so it'd be hard to imagine he ramps himself all the way back up into some kind of high caliber game shape. So those are the 2 injury pieces. I don't know. Where'd you land on this one?
This is to me, this is the hardest one to pick because if you talk about narratives, I so want to lean into it's Steve Kerr, it's Curry, it's Clay, it's Draymond. It's the fact that all of their role players, as they roll through them over the years, they always seem to maximize what their value is. So it feels right for if Curry's going to get out there and be close to 100% version of himself. It'd be really easy to take Golden State, and it also feels indicative of where Denver has come up short over the last handful of seasons. They have one of the best players in the game, and yet seemingly can't find their way to get to Western Conference Finals and get to NBA Finals. this is one that I feel like maybe I'll be embarrassed about on the back end. I'm going with Denver.
Nice.
And I'm going
only because we disagree.
I'm going right. Yeah, nice because we disagree. I'm going Denver 4. I'm going to go Denver 4-3. Full 7-game series, and the home court plays the factor.
All right, I went Golden State 4-1. I think they rolled them. I think they rolled them. I think that we don't have a good glimpse of what this Warrior team has been like this year because nothing has really worked out in terms of. Oh, you're holding up. Nothing has really worked out.
Just so the details are there.
Now you want to say like, oh, it was, and with some teams you say, okay, well, they haven't got a chance to play together a lot. Like the Nets are like this. It's like, we don't actually know what it's going to look like, right? We don't know what this, the Simmons plus Durant kind of thing looks like or whatever. Yep. I mean, you can assume it's going to be fine, but you just don't know. That's not the case with Curry, Clay, and Draymond, right? Like, when those guys play together that it works. Like, we have a historical perspective on sort of how that works. And the other thing too is, like, there's like a very good chance that the Warriors should be way closer to the 1 seed here than the 4 seed, except that injuries just derailed their season in terms of 1-loss record. Like, you want to guess how many minutes Draymond, Clay, and Steph played together this year?
Oh God, it cannot be anything impressive, can it?
11 minutes.
Jesus. I mean, I was going to say like 50 or 60 or something, but what?
No, because Clay sat out for such a long time, and then Draymond got hurt, and then Curry got hurt. Like, it happened basically in succession, right? Like, they were playing really well to start the season. And then Clay was recovering from the Achilles and the ACL. And then Draymond got hurt somewhere around December, or January, which completely wiped my Draymond Defensive Player of the Year bet off the map, which I'm definitely salty about. And then, if you can't tell, and then Curry got hurt late season when Draymond was coming back. So they have not played it all together. But if there was a triumvirate of players, and plus they have Wiggins, Poole, they have other guys here. Like, if there's a triumvirate of players that I felt confident about being able to get in sync pretty quickly, like, this is like the one group I'd say they don't need ramp up time in terms of this. I think they rolled them. I wouldn't even be shocked if it was a sweep, but Jokic is so good that I have a little hard time going back the other way.
So that's how bad you think.
I think this one's pretty easy.
Are. I mean, that's how bad you think the Nuggets are then, because that was good. My last question.
It's not Jokic. It's everybody else. It's everybody else.
Well, that's what I mean. And by the way, old Uncle Jeff is going to be there for him. Jeff Green helping out. But the point being, it's like when you look at these matchups, and it's not this one-to-one thing of LeBron James, Cleveland, early days where he drags his team through a bad Eastern Conference. But the idea of, like, at some point, doesn't he need to be worth a series? Now, maybe the matchup is just wrong where you end up having Curry and Clay, these guys that are really high, they're high-level NBA players. It's not like, if this was Memphis, I might say, well, Joker should be able to overcome some of these deficiencies of his team, but you can't ask for that against the Golden State Warriors.
I just think they kind of, again, another team that punched above their weight for the regular season based on Jokic had just like a historical performance and was basically healthy the whole entire season, right? And so when you get, because sometimes with these records, like, you have to factor this piece in. Yeah, Jokic played 74 of the 82 games. He played the whole season. And when you have, and he put up historical numbers. He was great. Like, he was otherworldly. This is a top, very, very small percentage all-time season. It's just that now, this is what I think, to me, a little bit, this is where things come home to roost. It's like, you had this group healthy. You had the best player healthy for the whole time. You won a lot of games on the back of him being great. He's great. I could look stupid on this one too. I don't know. Maybe I'm underselling Jokic. It's just, it's just not, I don't know. I just can't, it's hard for me to envision this Warriors group if they even get a little dialed in. Like, not actually kind of running away with the series, but that we'll see.
We'll find out, man. We have the last two, Boston and Brooklyn, and then Milwaukee and Chicago. Boston, I mean, listen, let's just do Milwaukee, Chicago here, because we said it with John, but we'll make like our official picks on our series, Boston and Brooklyn last. Milwaukee versus Chicago. This one, I think we're going to agree on. It's just a matter maybe of the semantics. I mean, listen.
I'm just going to hold mine up because this one's easy.
It's just going to be Bucks, and I didn't get the 4-0 in there, but you can go
I think
ahead.
They sweep.
Tag it on. It's Giannis. It's everything. And Chicago's been a nice story, and they're a good team. But even all season long and entering into the playoffs, I think everyone looks at Chicago as being so nice for you to decide to stop by. Feel free to enjoy some beverages. There's some snacks on the table, and you can go ahead and exit as quickly as you'd like.
I mean, look, this minus 1,400 for the Bucks, easily the biggest series price, not even close. Like, doubles up the next closest one. This one, I mean, okay, we don't have the 1-8 ones yet, so I take that back. Those ones might. I actually don't even think either of those 1-8 matchups eclipse with this one. In terms of the overall betting odds. So No, never mind. Suns, whoever they play is going to. So that will be the biggest one because they'll be a bigger favorite than either against the Pelicans or the Clippers. Anyway, yeah, Chicago had a nice season. They got kind of a little killed by injuries by two guys they absolutely needed in Caruso and Ball over the course of the season. They do have Caruso back. They could really still use Lonzo here. They just don't have enough firepower. Like DeRozan has been awesome. Levine was great. They had really nice seasons from those two guys.
The match
It's
is
just going to
bad.
be
Size is bad here in this.
yeah.
One
It's just
for
get
them,
like
too.
they don't really have a great Giannis speed bump. I don't think. And so I think Milwaukee rolls them. I would love to see them take a game. I would actually love to see them actually press Milwaukee a little bit, like and make them work because that would help. That would be a little might have some downstream effects, but it's hard. It's really hard for me to envision it happening.
We'll do the back end of the play in the 1/8. We'll talk about that on the back end of the Nets game tomorrow, but we know that those are going to be fairly, we would think, presumably easy ones for the 1 seeds in both conferences. Let's talk about then. This is it, man. Brooklyn, Boston. Just pen to paper here because John Carolus has Boston in 5 was his one game for Brooklyn gets off here. We debated it. You can go watch that episode over on YouTube. Doug
look at the comments.
In disagree or see the way some people felt. And by the way, we're a big fan of John. He's a good guy and a well-informed guy. So, but it got salty. And but bottom line being, you suggested that when you were picking this series, it was kind of John's bullishness around 5-game series in favor of Boston that swung you a little bit about where you want to go with it. But did it slip out in that episode that you were saying you were going to go Boston in 7?
Yeah.
And is that was my original pick?
Well, I'm going to change it now because I'm still mad at Corrales. Well, real quick. So the series line on this one is down to -145 in favor of the Celtics. So not quite a pick 'em, but they are slight favorites. That probably looks something that line to me looks a little like these teams are pretty even and they have home court advantage. Like I wouldn't be shocked if that line went maybe actually a dead pick 'em if it was Brooklyn in the home court advantage piece. That I think that actually does kind of at this point matter. It matters a little, at least a little bit. So I worried, and I didn't say this with John because I just couldn't believe he was so confident about the 5 games that it really
threw me off in the middle.
Totally threw me off. Well, there was a comment. It was a great comment on YouTube because it was like someone who didn't know what my name was. And so the guy in the upper right corner was making faces. So I must have been like making, I didn't watch it back. I must have been making faces like wide-eyed or just looking like agog or something when he was talking. Cause that definitely threw me off because I wasn't expecting it. But I appreciate I do appreciate what John, like, you know, I don't even think it's a hot take. I think he just believes it. I don't know. I think fine by that. And he gave some reasoning. So anyway, my concern with this series was sort of actually where John went, but I just didn't take it to the craziest conclusion that he did, is that I do think the Nets are going to get really worn down in this series and in a way that they are not going to be able to wear down Boston. Like it is going to be a lot easier for the Celtics, who are really well coached and actually have almost perfect personnel to handle something like this. Like, to be able to throw lots of different defensive looks at the Nets and lots of different like capable defenders on those guys, on Durant specifically, and then Kyrie, that the wear down effect, once you take it out over an entire series, is going to be pretty tangible. I think we're going to see. And John was joking because, you know, what are the changes that Nash makes, right? And the only change that they make is that they've just played Durant into Irving the whole game. They don't really have a lot of bullets in this chamber coming from the bench and whatever. So short of absolute peak performances by Curry, who's still nursing an ankle, and like Ben Simmons being able to come back and like actually do something, I just really think it's going to be a rock fight. And I think Boston's a little bit more set up to be able to handle that. So anyway, that's what I was originally going to say. What's that?
So you're saying Boston in 7?
Well, I'm still going to say Brooklyn in 7 because I said it on the podcast yesterday, and I don't want to root against that. So I'm just going to say Brooklyn in 7. I don't have so much conviction about the other thing that I want to take it the other way. So I'll go a little homer. Brooklyn 6. How?
I'm going Brooklyn in 6. Now, interestingly enough, for the exact reason that you're saying,
you're going to make me be careless. You're going to make me be careless on the podcast, jerk.
No, well, no, but it's to your point, though. I think that the longer the series goes, the more that Brooklyn get worn down by the physicality of Boston. So in some ways, like, this comes down to, opening game tomorrow, like steal that game in Boston. And that's how you can start to go in the right direction with this series. You get back home. We know the record means nothing because Kyrie didn't play there. I got a feed on Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. It'll be interesting to see how the supporting cast. We said this in the Cavs playing game. Really quiet 34 minutes from Seth Curry. Had a lot of rest here. Bruce Brown's been fantastic. You have to find a way. I think every single game of this series is about Brooklyn getting themselves just comfortable offensively, finding their rhythm early so that it just forces Boston to have to switch gears a little bit, because you can't lean into your defensive end of the floor and be focused on that solely if the offense is getting away from you, right? So this is very ebbs and flows. I'm not like bullish on this, but we talked about this in the other series. It's hard to say Brooklyn goes to Boston for a game 7 and wins it on the road. So I'd like to think that they can steal one of these early ones and then build the momentum back in Brooklyn on their home court. I know there's not, and we talked about this with John, not a lot that the Nets can go to here. But the one thing I will say is when you look at behind Kyrie, behind Curry, behind Dragic, then you mentioned like it's Patty Mills, like how deep does this rotation go for Brooklyn? I wonder about Kessler Edwards and how far they'll push him here. When you think about the relatively thin depth for the Nets, I don't know if I'm advocating for him to get 25, 30 minutes a game, or if that'll be out of a product of necessity. But I do think that his length and defensive upside, along with the perimeter shooting, you hope that he can at least be somewhat consistent with, might be as important as anything in a series like this when you talk about the length and the size of Boston and the physicality they're going to play with too, because the Nets don't have that physical presence at every single position the way Boston does.
Yeah, I mean, we could probably see minutes from him. I would think that if he's playing a lot of minutes, that something like sort of weird is going wrong, would be my guess. I know he played 39 in that game against Indy, where they ended up going a little small too. I would say it wouldn't be the worst thing. I also probably tend to think his minutes are like break in case of emergency sort of minutes, right? Like he played the 39 because Curry didn't play, so it didn't start. But we could see those lineups being too small for Boston, right? Like we could see those lineups being problematic because too many guards against a really long Boston team could wear thin pretty quickly. So I guess, yeah, I'm with you. There's a world where he could play a lot of minutes. I think that would probably be still very problematic for this team in terms of winning a high level series against Boston, because he's just not good enough. He's maybe one day he will be. He's just not now. But it also probably wouldn't mean like a death knell. Like if we saw lots of minutes at like Blake and LaMarcus Aldridge, we knew the series is over, right? So I wouldn't put him in that category for sure, obviously. But I also think if you held a gun to their heads, they probably don't want to play him a lot, is my guess.
Yeah, and it's the thing about like Patty Mills and his value, but then the downside of what happens on the defensive end for him. We've seen the attacking, attack the switches, get onto that favorable matchup, try to mitigate some of that, I guess, depending on how Boston looks and how they're attacking with Tatum. And I mean, Smart, right? Like, can you trust Patty Mills against Marcus Smart if he happens to find his rhythm from the outside? These are like those sub matchups that'll be interesting to watch, man. And obviously, if I'm calling for Brooklyn in 6, they got to win. They got to win more of them than not to get through this one.
And things just need to go. I think for both teams, things just kind of need to go right here. Like they need to hit threes. Like there's just going to be. I think this is a very even. I think you can hear it. I find this to be a very, very even series. This one's a very tough one to evaluate the two totally different teams. All right, appreciate everyone jumping on for the bonus episode. Make sure you like and subscribe over on YouTube. We'll be back after the game 1 on Sunday between Boston and Brooklyn, probably sometime in the evening. We'll have the episode up as quickly as possible, hopefully after a Brooklyn win. In the meantime, thanks for joining Locked On Nets.